of the other spectacular events on Good Friday, of course, is the rending of the great veil of the temple, which separated the Holy of Holies from the rest of the temple area. This was a terrible sign in terms of what might have happened to the temple in the future. As a matter of fact, we have in the Jewish rabbinical traditions a record that one of the rabbis was so concerned about the tearing of the temple veil that he wept for the fall of Jerusalem, which he predicted, and indeed it would come 40 years later. The temple itself was, of course, a sacrosanct area, and there was this veil which was very heavily woven, we understand. And the tearing of it was, I guess, not something as spectacular as we might imagine, that suddenly two angels ripped it apart or something like that. It was rather a function of the earthquake, I think, simply because the anchors of the veil were attached to sturdy vertical columns of stone, and then when they would split this way because of the earthquake, you're going to have that tear taking place. It's also, I think, a symbol in many ways that the old ceremonial law of the Jews no longer applied to the New Israel in the New Testament, and that now we have free access even to the heart of worship of the one true God.
I come to the cross seeking mercy and grace. I come to the cross where he died in my place. Out of my weakness and into his strength. Jesus, I come. Jesus, I come. Humbly I come to the cross. The words I would like to share for our meditation tonight are from the Gospel of St. Matthew, the 27th chapter. And when Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. And at that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. Dear friends in our suffering Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, all of us appreciate and are at peace when we can gain access into a facility. If you go down to the College World Series or go over to a Husker football game and you have no tickets in hand, you're a bit nervous and somewhat frustrated, and you are hoping beyond hope that you can make the purchase that allows you access into the game. When you go to your office and realize that you've left your office key at home, or when you're in the office and you lock the door and realize that your car keys are there, or if you realize that your house keys aren't on your property, there's frustration, anxiety, because you don't have access to the places that you want to be. Tonight we're going to take a look at the access that God now gives us to himself through the suffering and the death of his Son, Jesus Christ. Throughout the wilderness wanderings, the people of God would set up their tents of worship, the tabernacle. And they had already begun to weave a curtain that separated the Ark of the Covenant from the people, because the Ark of the Covenant served as a reminder of the presence of God. It was a beautiful curtain that was woven out of blue and scarlets and purple. And the people began to think that since God is so holy and is always talking about his holiness and his perfection, we're never going to get to that point. And we can't offer enough sacrifices to be as holy as God. We can't purify ourselves enough and do enough washings. And so maybe the best is just to avoid God. And in fact, they went pursuing after other gods, God that made them a little bit more comfortable, that didn't have so many rules and regulations, and gods who permitted them to do the very things that they wanted to do for their own pleasures. But they didn't want to throw away the whole religious system, so they would appoint one individual, the high priest, and they would get him clean. Washings and sprinklings and sacrifices. And once a year, he would go behind that curtain and offer a sacrifice for all the people. When they came into Jerusalem, or at the time of Solomon, he built what was known as one of the 8 wonders of the world, 7 wonders of the ancient world. And his temple was phenomenal. And a larger curtain woven again in blues and in purples and in scarlet would adorn the whole temple, but it separated the people from this area where they knew that God was habitating. But again, since God was so holy and they were not, they just kept their distance and allowed the high priest to go in and offer the sacrifice for them. Well, Herod, who had sold out to the Romans, now built this beautiful edifice, a temple, in Jesus' time, because he wanted to try to win the Jewish favor. And now we have a curtain, 60 feet high, probably about as tall as this building, 20 feet wide. And we're told that that curtain had the width or the depth of a man's hand. That was a garment. It said if anything was ever done to wash it or to move it, it would take 300 priests. That's how big the garment was. That's how big the curtain was. That's how big the separation was of God's people from their God. They had no access to him. You and I don't have a 60 by 20 hand-width garment separating us from God. But we build our own curtains in our own temples. We build up a curtain through our profession or our work or our employment, and we get so wrapped up in it that we fail to have access into the presence of God. We get so out there in cyberspace with our gizmos and our gadgets and our toys that we spend all day and all evening and all of our extra time in this social networking that we forget to network and find access into the presence of God. We're so wrapped up in recreation and pleasure and sports and activities that we've built a curtain and a veil that separates us from the very presence of God. And not only do we have a curtain and a veil in front of us, we build them around us and beside us too. Because we don't want to look out into the world. We would just as soon build a beautiful deck in the backyard with a wonderful garden where we could go out there in our own solitude, not to be bothered by the needs and the cares of this world. We get home and no more than get the garage door up and we want it down so I don't have to look out, I don't have to hear, I don't have to pay attention to the hurts of my neighbors, to the needs of those around me. We don't want to hear what's going on in our community because we don't want to take the responsibility to do anything about it. So we build up curtains, we put up veils.